Welcome to the Palisadoes Foundations Calico Challenge presentation for the System Server open source project. It's a part of the insite projects that we saw in a previous presentation. For those of you who don't know, the Palisadoes Foundation LLC is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization registered in California. It was conceived by a group of Jamaican technology professionals interested in assisting in the continued development of new and existing technologies in Jamaica. Our principal activity is the Calico Challenge, where each year we sponsor summer internships for university students studying in Jamaica. The students work on developing new open source software projects under the guidance of a professional mentor. Stipends are paid upon achieving predefined milestones. The Insights projects were discussed in a previous presentation. The data that Insight uses to create its charts on computer system performance is provided by System Server, which you will see now. This summer, System Server was developed by Ranil Wallace under the mentorship of Cleon Mullings. Ranil, please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, good night, everyone. Tonight, I'll be presenting on System Server, which is a project that I worked on during the summer. So, who am I? My name is Ranil Wallace. As I said before, I'm 18 years old. I'm a second-year student at the University of Technology, Jamaica. I'm currently enrolled in the Bachelor's in Computing program, majoring in computer science, and I have 3 years experience in JavaScript and Node.js. So what did I work on this summer? So this summer I worked on the package System Server. What is System Server exactly? It's a Node.js package it's a Node package that allows a user to access very detailed system information on a local machine over HTTPS, such as RAM, storage, battery, OS-related stuff, etc. The framework that I use to develop or to improve on this package is Node.js. Node.js is an open source cross-platform JavaScript runtime environment that executes JavaScript code outside of the browser, which is the language that System Server is developed in. Now, when I started working on System Server, it was a basic package as was used by my other team members for their projects. And at the moment, it would only run on one route. And it, as you could see, it didn't run with an SSL certificate. So it was just regular HTTP. We settled on working on 3 features. This is how it looked before. So if you went to the URL that is presented here, it would direct you to this page, which shows you the information in a JSON object. There are 3 features that were implemented. 1, the unique machine identity feature. 2, GraphQL, and 3, HTTPS. The first feature allows the package to generate a unique identification number that is used to identify each machine on the network. Now, what we did is that we used a UUID package, and then we stored that UUID on the first run of the package, and that is stored on the local machine. So whenever you run the project again, it would use the same UUID. The second feature was GraphQL. Now, GraphQL is a syntax that describes how to ask for data and is generally used to load data from the server to the client. Using this, you can simplify the exact data you want without getting unnecessary data. So as you can see on the right, what we did is that if we just wanted 3 things, the ID of the machine, the timestamp, and the version, you could actually request those 3 exact things, and only those things would be returned. This is an example of the GraphQL graphical user interface, which is found on the root /GraphQL from our server. So as I said before, on the left, we specified the exact data that we wanted, which in this case was the ID, the timestamp, and the version in the query. And then on the right is the result that is sent over to us. The other feature that we implemented was HTTPS. HTTPS stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. It is a secure way of transferring data over the network from the server to the client without any form of tapping. The data is served over HTTPS protocol by using an SSL certificate, which helps to create a secure encrypted connection between the server, which in this case is our project, and the client, which is anyone who is using the project, therefore protecting potentially sensitive information. And this is an example of HTTPS, which if you go to pretty much any modern site, if you check the URL bar, you'll see that the URL begins with HTTPS, which means that they have a SSL certificate. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a live demo using System Server along with the new features that were implemented. Okay, so on the right, I'm going to be running the project. As you can see, it gives us the URL. Now, if I go to the browser and actually go to the URL, it presents us with the data. And this is how the project was running before we implemented the new features. It's saying not secure because the SSL certificate was not verified. However, it is generated. If it was hosted online, then it would actually show you the right information. As you can see, this is our UUID. If I were to end the server and load it again, reload the page, you can see it's the same UUID because it is stored locally on the machine. We also implemented GraphQL. So if we go to the URL and go to /GraphQL, oops. When implementing GraphQL, they normally include a graphical user interface so you can actually interact with it without having to write up any sort of code. In this case now, say we just want the ID and the timestamp. If we run the query, it just presents us with the ID and the timestamp. But say we want something else, like the CPU information. In this case, let's go for manufacturer and model. We run it again, it shows that this computer, the CPU was manufactured by Intel and the model number is 62. Let's say we want to check the battery status and we want to check if it has a battery. I'm currently running a Mac Pro, which is connected to an outlet. It doesn't have a battery, so therefore you can see it does not have a battery. We can also try the OS. We want the platform, oops, and the distro. I'm running Mac OS, so the distro is Mac OS and the platform is Darwin. Also, let's try this in a more practical sense in the case of developers, like the persons who are working on the respective projects this summer. So I have Postman running here, which is a software that basically emulates what would happen if an app, a program, a site, a server would be querying the same information. If we send the request, the regular request, we get back data as I showed you before in the browser. But we can also send a request with our query information. So in this case, we're getting the ID, the manufacturer, platform, distro, the manufacturer for the CPU and the brand, and as well as the battery status. If we send that query, we will receive the data in a JSON object, which the app or whichever service that you're implementing that uses System Server would now take this object and do what it needs to do with the data. The challenges. During the development of the project, there wasn't really any challenges. As I said, I've had over 3 years experience with Node.js and JavaScript. The only challenge was with Git. It was rebasing. So what we did is that I forked the project, which essentially means that I took a version of the project and hosted it on my profile. Now, whichever change that I made to that would not be reflected on the original project's files. But then what we would need to do is that we would need to merge my changes with the changes on the original branch. So what would happen is that I'm creating 3 different sections. So I'm basically categorizing my project into 3 sections because we implemented 3 different features and we did not want them to interact with each other until we were to put everything together. So what would happen is that I was working on one feature, which was the GraphQL feature. And then what I did is that I created a branch from that GraphQL feature to implement HTTPS. But because Git stores a history of the project files, the history for the GraphQL implementation was still inside of the history for the HTTPS implementation. Now, it might not seem like a problem now, but when it's time to merge all of the changes, you might end up into conflicts because an older version is in the newer branch. So what I did is that I spoke to my mentor and he recommended some reading, some articles, which were really useful, and I was able to overcome that challenge. This is just a little GIF explaining what rebasing is. As I said, rebasing is essentially taking all your new changes and placing them at the top of the original history of the project. What I learned. The first thing I learned was GraphQL. As I said, I only did Node.js and JavaScript. It was the first time I was interacting with GraphQL. It was the first time I was actually implementing it into something. It takes care of querying data in an easier way, and it allows users to specify the data that they want. That's what I learned from GraphQL. And I also learned a lot about Git and GitHub. Now, Git is a distributed version control system for tracking changes in source code during software development. And during the course of the project, we use Git to store the project files. And GitHub is a Git repository hosting service. So we hosted the Git repository on GitHub. And that concludes my presentation.
All right. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I have a few questions, but maybe I would defer to some of the other people on the call if they have any.
Sure, no problem.
Hi, Jeff Waddington here. Just had a quick question about how you implemented the SSL on each one of the clients. How do you get a certificate that's valid for each one of those clients so you can connect to them with SSL?
Oh, sure. Okay. I actually created a script here. I believe that each platform has their own package used to generate the certificates locally on the machine. So what I did is that I combined all of the scripts so that you could actually run it in one script, which is npm run SSL. So before you run the project, what you would have to do is that you'd have to generate the SSL certificate because it doesn't come with the package. So I'm just going to go to, this is the folder. This is the certificate, the key and the certificate. If I remove this, let's take it to here. Let's keep this up. So if I run npm run SSL, which is the script that I made, it's taking me through the process to generate the certificate. As you see, it created the SSL folder. And after I finish this setup, which isn't long, let's say Kingston locality. Calico. We can leave that empty, and we can put the host as Calico. @gmail.com. And then there, it generates the certificate and the key. And then all you'd have to do now is just run the project, and it should work again. Did that answer the question?
Yes, very good. Very good presentation.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
All right, so I do have a question for you, Ranil. The interaction between what you've done with the system server, how does that work with the Insight API that the guys were presenting in the previous presentation?
Okay. Well, it actually works in the same way how they implemented it before, which I'm assuming is that they ran for each local machine. Well, for the machines, I remember where was it Quito, I think. The presentations last week where they used system server, they would still be running system server just like how they did before, which is just running the package itself. And then once they have the URL for each of the machines that they're running the system server for, they can still implement, well, they can still use the implementation using the same URL. It's just that there will be added features, such as I said, GraphQL, which they could use to send a request to the machine and ask for what they want, and it's returned in the JSON object, and they can use that object to probably render a page or display it somehow, but it's the same implementation.
Yes, but the question is more along the lines of how does the Insight API interact with the system server API to provide the information for Insight itself? Were you a part of that?
Oh no, I was not a part of that. I was just in charge of setting up system server and adding the additional features.
Okay, and then they use your code as a part of their project to give them the output that they provided in the presentation.
Yes, so after I made all of my changes, then they would be merged to the main package. So when they update the package now, they would have access to the additional features.
How did you decide upon what parameters would be provided as a part of the GraphQL output?
Okay, so we used a package called system information that gets all the information on the system itself. And then all I did really is that I wrote down all the information that it sends over, and then I just converted them to their respective definitions for GraphQL. So all that you're seeing here is exactly the same information that is returned with the system information package. And then I just converted them into definitions for GraphQL.
How do you think that you could use GraphQL in the working world once you start in the working world itself?
GraphQL. Well, you know, GraphQL was developed by Facebook, and they actually use it in their respective apps and their services. I noticed that a lot of persons are using GraphQL currently to display feeds. So as I mentioned before, like the Instagram feed or a Facebook feed, you can actually use it to say, for example, you have a page that shows a list of comments, right? You could actually query, say, I wanted the profile picture and the username as well as the comment for each person. I can get all of that one time instead of, you know, the traditional way where I would have to get the list of comments first, which, you know, would probably only have the user ID alone. And then after that, I would have to loop through each of those comments and all of those user IDs and then get the information for that user, which would take up a lot of time, versus GraphQL, where once you set it up with the database, you can query all of that information in one run. So instead of making say 100 requests that takes probably 5 minutes to process. You just get one request and it returns all the information to you one time.
How is what you described any different from using query strings with a more traditional RESTful API?
Well, as I said before, the way how databases are designed is that they aren't really designed to have a lot of information in one place. So you would have, let's say, a users table, and then you would have a comments table. You wouldn't have all of the users' information in the comments table because that would cause redundancies. So, which when creating regular REST APIs, it is known that you would say have a route that has /users. It returns all the users. And if you have /comments, it returns all the comments. But it's just returning the data how it is. Now, using GraphQL and putting it in the mix and connecting it with your database, GraphQL handles all of the querying, the multiple querying that you'd have to do. So if I was using a regular REST API, I would have to call all the comments first. And then after that, since when querying all the comments, it only returns the comment itself and the user ID. I would have to probably query all the users by their ID so that I can get more information that I would need. So in total, that would probably be a lot of requests sent in a short span of time, which could rack up and probably slow down server times, slow down the app's time in processing all of that information.
So what you're saying then is that it allows you to do the database joins as a part of the query string,
Yes.
or of the JSON that is being sent, and so therefore it makes it more efficient.
Yes.
Okay, so with GraphQL, and I'm asking this question because this is not something that I'm necessarily 100% familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
If you had a traditional database in the background, would you be able to layer GraphQL on top of it to get this type of functionality that you're talking about?
Yes, most definitely. Let me see if I can find. Let's see if I can find the list. Okay. So you could, GraphQL is like the middleman between the database and the client. You could actually just, if you could implement GraphQL and you can get the data from anywhere. So I could have easily just had the data in this array, for example. No database, nothing. But I could still implement it with GraphQL to set up the query and return the information. You could have set it up with SQL. You could set it up with MongoDB or any other type of database, because it doesn't depend on what the database is. It only depends on where the data. That's it. So it doesn't matter wherever you're getting your data from, as long as you're getting the data and feeding it to GraphQL, that's all that really matters.
Okay, so there would be, for example, a MySQL, some sort of an API for MySQL or Postgres or whatever the database would be that would then feed into the GraphQL.
Yes.
I see. And so what is happening now that this provides more clarity on what was being shown in the previous presentation, because they were showing us the fact that they were taking the data from system server and then dumping the data into a Postgres database. Mm-hmm. And then they themselves were using GraphQL to get the data from the Postgres database to make the presentation on the Insight itself. So Insight API was using GraphQL to take the data from the Postgres database, which was in turn populated by system server using a regular scraping script. So that's interesting to see that there's GraphQL being used on both sides, and it provides some clarity. Thank you.
No problem. Are there any more questions?
Yes, I have another one. You are a member of the IEEE club at UTech, are you?
I'm not. I'm actually a part of UTech SAMLA.
Okay. Would this GraphQL's methodology be something that you would recommend for some of the projects that you're being done at SAPNA at the moment? And if not, why not? And if so, why?
Most definitely. Trust me. After learning about GraphQL, I want to implement it in everything. We have some projects working on currently, and they use regular REST APIs. And me and the guys, we actually started talking about, oh, we could probably implement GraphQL because it prevents us having to send multiple requests to the database just to get simple information. So we're working on enterprise systems, and enterprise systems, they have a lot of tables, they have a lot of data. Just imagine you get 1,000 rows of data, and then you'd have to get information on that data based on an ID, and then having to go through all of that at the same time. It takes a long time, and enterprise systems, efficiency is key. So implementing GraphQL and thinking about implementing GraphQL, it speeds up our workflow, it speeds up the apps, it speeds up everything. Trust me, I want to implement this in everything I can.
So coming back to that, it's interesting that you mention it. It sounds as if then, it sounds as if that you would need to be able to load the database schema from your enterprise system somehow into GraphQL so that you could do those queries.
Yes.
All right. And is that something that is readily available that's online for a GraphQL user to use? For example, if you happen to have a SQL database, dump the schema, import it into GraphQL, and then this is what you do. Are there tutorials for that? Because I'm sure people listening to this presentation would want to know whether that's the case, and so that they would want to try and see this for themselves.
Yes. Okay. So there are many GraphQL libraries for different languages. So I'm using JavaScript, Node.js, and Express. So I use the library Apollo Server Express. I'm just going to the browser real quick. I actually use the docs that they have a lot. Pretty much every library that is there for GraphQL for the respective language that you're using for the implementation, they have their docs available on their official site, whether it's a website itself or their GitHub, but it's there. It shows you creating the server, creating queries, how to define them, how to create resolvers. It's all there. So if just all you need to do is just know what language are you going to use. If you're going to use JavaScript, just search for GraphQL for JavaScript. There are many of them for different languages.
Okay. You'd mentioned that you hadn't been exposed to GitHub a great deal, even though that you've been working with SAPNA. Is this something that you try to work with more closely with in SAPNA and across the teams?
Yes, actually, since the semester began, I have been learning more about Git. Instead of GitHub, we're using GitLab, but they do the same thing. And now I am in the process of becoming a maintainer, which is a person that actually is in charge of the Git repository and now merges, clones, all of that stuff, the project itself. So since learning initially from Calico and then building upon that, yeah.
Okay. Does GitLab have a web interface so that you can see changes? Or is it all command line?
No, they actually do have they have an interface. It's a private site, as in, GitHub is very public. So if I could just go to a GitHub, a package on GitHub, and it's there, you can actually search for packages on GitHub. GitLab, on the other hand, it's for private repositories. So you can't really use it unless you have an account and you're on a project or you created a project. But once you do, you have a graphical interface where you can go through. I can probably open up one of my basic projects. You can go through, you can see the files, You could open the folders, you could, you know.
Okay. At my company, what we've done is that we have an internal Git server, and we use a product called Fabricator. That's Fabricator with starting with a PH. It has very similar features to this, and you can see the diffs in red and green in parallel. And so we've decided to use it internally versus using an external service just for our own some of our security requirements that we have. And so that may be
Nice.
something else that you could consider if you want to do something privately versus going on with a cloud service.
That's actually a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, its Fabricator was chosen because we know that it was created by Facebook and they use it internally. And
Okay.
it looks fairly similar to this, but it has some more features. It integrates with LDAP if you have it, or Active Directory if you have it. So we found it very interesting internally for our purposes.
Nice.
Okay, I don't have any questions. I think I've asked so many. Does anybody else have any other questions? Nope. All right, well, Ranil, thank you very much. On behalf of the Calico Challenge and the Palisadoes Foundation, I wish you all the best. And of course, we have a number of our sponsors on the line here. The primary sponsors this year were NCB, Rail Decoy, Vertis Technologies, as well as Simtai and the Grace Kennedy Foundation. We are hoping that next year, which is 2020, will be our 5th year, and we really expect this and other projects to really take off. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.